but yeah, they would be eligible for a new restorative process. Mishka, is that your name? Mishka.
Two things. One, I'm a data nerd, so it's good to see that you guys keep really good data because I feel like that's what sells the programs to stakeholders. I saw in the circle that community members come to the circle as well. How do you define? How do you, I guess, identify community members who've been harmed and may be interested in coming to the circle?
Great question. The most common way is to ask the victims and the person harmed, is there anyone else who you'd like to invite? And to give them a sense of who it makes sense to invite. So I would tell them, is there anyone else who is involved or who you're close to that you feel could support you, that you want to be there? That could kind of be supporters or it could be community members. Or, you know, like I said, oftentimes it's in the school context, which is where a lot of these offenses happen. There's pretty standard types of community members you would invite, like the teacher or, you know, another student who was involved or a friend. Yeah. So you basically, again, it's the parties drive the bus. So you mainly are asking them what they want. I already asked a question for you, so I'm going to ask you.
My question's about the pre-conference prep. I've been thinking a lot about kind of stereotypes or prejudices that people involved in this process might kind of bring to the table with them. So if those things come up in a pre-conference, like let's say the person who was harmed, like somebody broke their window and the person who's harmed is white and the person who did the harm is a young person of color and they have stereotypes about them, do you all like ever divert people to like a diversity training or things like that when it comes up, or like does that happen and what do you do when it does?
I'm actually really glad you asked that because we like to the reality is that there's racial bias and there's a racial element to a lot of criminal justice and a lot of encounters, including restorative encounters. And we don't ignore that. The answer is, when you say you all, I'm assuming you're meaning like do the facilitators like facilitate that. There are different nonprofits will have relationships with different folks, sometimes counselors or sometimes programs like that, which can be offered. But again, really, it's going to be up to a couple of different things. It's going to be up to the facilitator to decide, like, is this a healthy thing? And to, like, if they perceive that there's some bias or some animus or some just even grumpy parties, like, they prepare the other parties for that and say, look, these folks aren't going to be, if these folks aren't going to be super friendly, like, are you still interested in participating in this? And the facilitator would probably be very reluctant to label, like, they're racist or something like that, because unless it's really going to be something that's front and center. And I can't say these things, like, what the best practices are always evolving around stuff like this, but those sensitivities are definitely something that are going to be up to the facilitator to manage and make sure are clear ahead of time to the parties. But it's not necessarily something that they'll be shielded from, because that's something that gets worked out. I mean, that's something that gets healed in the process often, or could be. I hope that helps answer.
No, I did. Thanks.
So you mentioned that only like there's only capacity for like 25% of what could be.
I don't know the exact number.
Right, but like roughly around. Right.
Be.
What's the process of? And then I know you also mentioned like the agreements for each jurisdiction, and you also mentioned traveling. So like I'm just wondering what's the process of building relationships with within the current criminal legal system to build systems of restorative justice that work, but also work in a way that's gonna do the most good. Especially because you mentioned that Impact Justice is only 2 years old, so it's like, what's to say that it's gonna run out of money and like it's not gonna, you know what I mean? Like you don't want these systems to fail, and you don't, and it's also sad to like be like, okay, we're starting here and it takes 10 years to do this one jurisdiction, and there's places like New Orleans, which is where I'm from, and it's like, yeah, that's like it would be great there, especially when like that story about Melanie, the relationship with schools and everything, school districts and criminal. I mean, it's just a lot.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot there.
I know. Sorry.
Well, no, it's great. Couple quick clarifications. So this nonprofit's 2 years old,
Okay.
but the work that Sujata has been doing in the Bay is
Is-
about 10 years old
Okay.
with other nonprofits. And there are restorative diversion programs like this that
Mhm.
have been up and running for many, many years. Like
Right.
in Baltimore, the Community Conferencing Center's been up and running for 20 years. So
Okay.
there's that.
Yeah.
But it's a really great question, and it's something that, how to support sustainable,
Right.
restorative diversion programs that have the trust of the community, in addition to the trust of the systems players, that's
Yeah.
my, like, life's work right now.
Okay.
That's the question that we inhabit most often. Like, that is not an easy thing to do, to make that marriage happen and to make sure that sustainable funding is there. Our organization, we're kind of like, we support and train,
Mhm.
and provide technical assistance to the actual folks that hold the work in each city. We, we've got great funding, whatever, and all that, but making sure that they get sustainable funding is
Mhm.
not always clear. And
Right.
literally like that, even right now, that's one of the big questions nationwide in the restorative justice community is how do we bring together all this funding that's coming in from the tech world, from other private foundations for restorative justice, how do we direct that to these types of programs in a sustainable way? Like that's something that I'm on calls about
Right.
all the time and that we're thinking about. It's not always easy.
Yeah. Well, because it seems like it doesn't really. It's almost like too idealistic and like perfect. I mean, in a perfect world with the criminal legal system, you would have the public defender and DA like working together to achieve certain goals, and you wouldn't have things like conviction rates, and things like, oh, like I'm tough on crime, so I'm going to get elected, and like these
Yeah.
like kind of not and beyond adversarial, but even personal interest of like a district attorney or a public defender, to plea away like cases, and then a DA to get convictions. And so it's just, I mean, like I want to be a public defender, and like I mean, what you were talking about earlier of just that's like the biggest crutch for me is like going into that field is like 98% to just like sign people's lives away is just, I mean.
Roman, can I piggyback for a second?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I want you to piggyback, but super quickly, as a quick clarification, Terrence, some of the programs being started up are connected to the probation department and
Right.
get state funding. There's a larger conversation about why that can be dangerous,
Right.
right? Because then the system is
Exactly.
more a part of it, so we like more independent programs.
Mhm.
The downside to independent programs, of course, is finding sustainable funding.
Right.
Typically, that's the challenge.
So I think, just to piggyback off of your point, Devin, there are two ways to approach the answer to your question. And I think the first is kind of what you've been talking about, which is how do we change the system?
Mhm.
How do we change the processes in which the criminal legal system is already engaging? And I think you've touched on that. It's exactly what you're saying, getting more
Right.
district attorneys involved, getting more public defenders involved, funding these programs, making them more accessible, and getting statistics like what we have to show that they are sustainable. I think beyond that, though, comes what we're doing right now,
Right.
which is that this program here at Santa Clara is brand new. Restorative justice has been around for generations, eons even, but this class is the first of its kind here.
Right.
And Berkeley Law, from where I graduated, I think we're in our 4th year of having a restorative justice program. So I think a bigger part of the solution is getting all of us future lawyers involved, so that even if you're not a part of the criminal justice system, you're implementing restorative justice principles in your practice. And for me personally, I've been able to do that 3 ways in my practice. The first being the way that I speak to my clients. If a plaintiff is coming to me and they say they want to sue someone, asking the types of questions that Roman has been training us to ask is a very important process, a very important step. So, as someone who's going to get a portion of the settlement, it might be in my financial best interest to ask, well, how much money are you looking for?
Mhm.
You know, and as a lawyer, you know, when you go to law school and you're trained in the traditional processes, I think that's a very traditional question to ask. What do the damages look like? What could you possibly get if you did go to court? Is it worth your time? But instead, training yourself to ask the question, what do you actually need? How do we ask that question? We say, what are you going to do with this money?
Right.
Say you do get $100,000 in a settlement. What are you going to do with it? Or are you still going to just be looking for more money? And I have been part of processes where that question is not asked. I remember my first summer working at law school. It's all confidential, so I can't tell you where it worked, but I went to a mediation with an insurance company, and I was representing the insurance company. And our clients, they owned this beautiful home. Actually, I can't give you any more information than that because it's actually something very local, was in the news. But long story short, the victim, the person harmed in that instance, would never have been satisfied. We went to mediation. We were there for 18 hours. We drew up this agreement. We had breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the room, and at the end of it, we're all sweating and exhausted. And we think we finally come to an agreement. It's like, oh, the clients are so happy. They're like, yeah, this isn't really the life that we wanted to live, but this is something that we can deal with. And it seemed like the person harmed was happy as well. And then the very next day, she violated the agreement. Everything that she said she was going to do, the next day she violated the agreement. And that's because no one actually asked her, what do you really need here? So I think the first thing that we can do is by changing the way we practice, and that is by speaking to our clients in a manner that informs them of the restorative justice process. The second thing is by, when you're speaking to the opposing party and opposing counsel, by reminding them, hey, what do you actually want? And I've had to tell people, I'm like, look, if you want to go to court, we can go to court. I don't have no problem with it. We can drag this out as long as you want to. I will get paid, but I'm going to get paid from you. I'm going to ask for attorney's fees, and you're going to pay me. And I charge $500 an hour. So if that's what you want, let's do it. It's going to be good for me. I mean, it'll be fun. It'll be experience. Like, I don't mind. What else do I have to do? But is that really what your client wants? Is there a way that we can do this without wasting all that time and money and energy? And then the third thing that I found is the actual processes in which we engage. So instead of, you know, saying first thing, I'm going to go to court and I'm going to issue a lawsuit, you know, I'm going to subpoena all these documents, saying, maybe I'll write a letter. Maybe I'll call them. I remember my third year of law school, I took a semester off to work in the entertainment industry in Los Angeles. And I remember I was working on a case for a visa. This young woman wanted a visa to stay in the country to work in the entertainment industry. And I went to my boss and I said, hey, I know you told me to deny her visa application, but I've really been looking through it. And I think if I call her and just tell her to change this one word, if she Control F's her application and she changes this one word, we really won't have a problem with it. It'll actually be a perfect application. And he told me, he said, that's not your job. That's not what I asked you to do. You need to write a denial. And it was at that moment that I decided I needed to work for myself. And it's why I'm on the path that I am now. But being mindful of the processes in which we engage. Mediation is a very effective process. I've been to multiple mediations, and I know I gave an example of one that really didn't work, but I've also been to mediations that really do work, where both parties come out feeling better than they would have, and it's faster than court, and it's cheaper, and the people harmed actually feel good about it because they've had a chance to express how they actually feel, which, to be quite honest, our criminal legal system right now does not ever allow that. Even if they get on stand and they tell their story, they have to be prompted. You can only answer the questions that I ask. You really can't just get up there and be like, blah, 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 blah. And I feel like that, you can't do that, and there's no opportunity. A lot of times people just want to be heard. They just want to know that you heard and felt how angry I was. And now that you know how angry I am, I'm not angry anymore. Forget the whole thing. I think that's the case of the Tinkerbell story. So while we can focus on the system, and we need to focus on the system,
Right.
what we're doing right now, educating the future generation of lawyers, making sure that people understand that this is a process, whether you're involved in the criminal legal system or not, in which you can engage, that's really how we're going to see things change.
All right. I think we're running up on time, so
Well, I want to thank you both so much. We learned a lot.
thank you guys.
Thank you. And I will be sending you links to some of the materials in the webinar. Thank you. Thank you.
And Roman's going to leave his contact information.
Oh, good.
So that guys can contact me.
I think that's how to stop it. Yeah. Did you stop it?
No.